All right, good evening, guys. I'll just let everyone sort of jump in. I think we've got a fair few registered for tonight, which is great to see. And I know I spoke to a number of members through the week, and everyone was really excited for tonight and the topic that Luke here will be running over. So it's really exciting to see. And I know we haven't been doing many of these night webinars, but if you're a fan of them, please do let us know as well. I mean, we're always up for feedback, and if you really do find this time better to sort of attend, then it's good for us. We're happy to do it as well. And it's great when we've got, Dr. Luke Del Vecchio here as well, who's happy to come along and run us through sort of a bit of a sort of education session tonight, guys, as well. So really appreciate Luke coming along. Luke's a senior sports scientist and lecturer, and is also the head of education at the Australian Combat and Exercise. So I'm sure a few of you have probably done a couple of courses with them in the past. I know that they're big in the sort of industry, and I know a lot of members of ours have really reached out and really appreciate the sort of work that they do in the industry. So as always, guys, if you do have any questions, please chuck them in the Q&A. So rather than the chat, if you pop them in the Q&A, I know we have a few people here tonight, so just helps us sort of monitor it a little bit, and of course we can get to the questions throughout if Luke can, or we can sort of jump through them at the end if there's a lot popping in there. But Luke, whenever you're ready, good to get going.
Yes, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Luke. And as he alluded to, I'll do my best to get to questions as they come up. I like the idea of you guys engaging, particularly this hour at night, because I know many of you have been up since the very early hours of the morning. So it certainly might help for you to ask a question or two as a way of staying engaged in the content. So this presentation is on bodyweight training for muscular fitness. So a few key areas I want to touch on. Firstly, is just to recognize the scientific basis of bodyweight training. Secondly, to introduce you to some mechanical principles that you might have forgotten about or you're more unaware of that guide bodyweight exercise progression and selection, and to identify muscle activities, so the role of EMG research in bodyweight exercise, how we can harness that information to better understand the bodyweight exercises we might be utilizing with our clients. And then lastly, to touch on some safety factors for bodyweight exercises. And I think two really important take-homes from tonight's presentation that I really hope we achieve is, one, bodyweight doesn't necessarily mean easy. Okay, so just remember that the loads in some bodyweight exercises can exceed the sorts of loads that you might experience in a conventional resistance training exercise where you're using free weights. So that's important to remember. And it's also important to remember that not every exercise, not every bodyweight exercise is necessarily safe for every client. So if we can achieve those two take-homes, we'll have achieved our goal today. So the scientific basis of bodyweight training. Firstly, it is quite interesting to note that in the American College of Sports Medicine's annual surveys on fitness trends, bodyweight training continues the trend in the top 10. And you can see in 2021 that bodyweight training was in the top 3. So it's clear that bodyweight training is trending because we're using it. Fitness professionals are relying on bodyweight training, and never more so since the COVID pandemic, where we've had to really innovate with our exercise prescription for our clients because they weren't able to access a gym or their usual place of training. And I can attest to that, having to very quickly learn the world of telehealth and adapt how I'm teaching my students at a university level to deliver exercise to clients when they can no longer do it face-to-face. And we really did rely on a lot of bodyweight exercise programs, and it's really what prompted this presentation. I just realized that bodyweight training is a little bit insidious in that we take a lot of it for granted. And I think we need to be aware that there is some really important safety considerations about bodyweight training we need to remember, because it's natural for us to assume that every bodyweight exercise will be a natural fit for our client simply because they don't have a load in their hand. Older adult training continues to trend, and that would probably relate to the aging population. And it's a very important topic as well. So that was a good question, and a good eagle eye there to notice that fitness programs for older adults was and still remains quite popular in these surveys. And a lot of that's to do with the fact that our older population are staying active for longer and becoming more interested in maintaining a level of fitness as they age. However, so despite the fact that body weight training is really trending, if we look at the statistics on how many of our local population, that is the Australian demographic, are meeting the physical activity guidelines for muscular fitness, it's a bit dirt. So only 15% of Australians aged 18 to 64 are reaching the muscular strength or muscular fitness guidelines. And that is, of course, that they need to be doing a couple of sessions a week that promote muscular fitness. Now, these statistics represent a few factors. One, that a lot of people aren't as interested in exercising in a gymnasium, and that's been magnified from COVID, but they are returning, so some good news there. However, to embark in a resistance training or a muscular fitness training program, the historical view is it has to be done in a gym. And I think one positive thing we learned from COVID is that not everything has to be done in a gym, and we can adapt and we can modify exercise prescriptions for our client, which is great news. And bodyweight training was a big part of that. But we do face an uphill battle in getting a larger percentage of our population, not just active, because it's obviously clear, and you're all very well of this, that most Australian adults struggle to meet these guidelines, but even fewer are struggling to meet the muscular fitness guidelines. So we need to be promoters and educators in this space and help the general public understand why is it important to engage in muscular exercise that promotes muscular fitness in addition to physical activity that promotes cardiovascular fitness and health. So we've got some work to do here. Now, just to remind you, some of this might be second nature to you, this information around what are the recommendations, but remember, this isn't for performance programming. This is generally for an individual to achieve good health from muscular fitness activity. And the aim here, as I alluded to in the last slide, is that every adult should aim to perform at least 2 sessions a week that promote muscular fitness. Now, in these 2 sessions, conventional guidelines, such as these promoted by the American College of Sports Medicine, are suggesting that at least 8 to 10 different exercises, 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 12 repetitions is the general recipe. However, I urge caution interpreting these guidelines, because one of the biggest factors that determines whether or not an individual or person will continue and adhere to an exercise program, of course, is time. You can think of this as the maximal dose, just like medicines prescribed with a lower range and an upper range, or a lower dose and a higher dose. Resistance training should be delivered in the lowest possible dose to start with. They call this the dosing concept, or low dosing concept, or minimal dosing concept. So it's got a few different names, and it's trending in the literature. And I urge you to pursue further readings in this space so you understand the minimal dose of muscular fitness exercise that will promote and meet these important health outcomes. So it might not be necessary for every individual to perform 2 to 3 sets to start with. Given the some situations, I should say, where individuals who are looking for an exercise program that's going to be outdoors, for example, where it's a little bit more difficult to do the 8 to 10 different exercises because some bodyweight exercises are quite demanding, as we'll show you in this presentation. So really think about learning more about the minimal dosing concept so we can get more people closer to meeting these guidelines. So just by way of example, 4 weekly sets, I'll say that again, 4 weekly sets per muscle group is a starting point for a lot of individuals who have got a very low fitness base and have not or are not doing any muscular fitness at all. So if you can get them just to 4 weekly sets per muscle group, per major muscle group. And an example of that would be a simple upper body push movement, upper body pull movement, and then one lower limb or one leg strengthening exercise. So just with those 3 exercise patterns or movement patterns, dosed at 4 sets per week is a starting point and should elicit improvements in muscular fitness for as long up to 12 weeks, depending on, of course, the fitness base or the entry point of that person. But that's typically the sort of dose that a novice can start with and expect to see improvement for the first 12 weeks. Yes, I'm sure there will be a possibility or a way we can circulate the slides at the end. So thanks for that question. Okay, so this is the why is it important? So why bother? Why bother with muscular fitness? Okay, aside from aesthetics, we know that a lot of people will pursue resistance training or strength training simply because they want to improve their muscular fitness or improve their aesthetics. In other words, improve muscle hypertrophy. But that's not the only reason why people need to engage in muscle strengthening exercise. And particularly one way they can do that, of course, is through bodyweight exercise programs. Simply put, poor muscular fitness or poor strength is now a recognized risk factor for cardiovascular disease, in addition to cardiometabolic disease. Cardiometabolic. What's cardiometabolic? It's the combination of cardiovascular risk factors, such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, in addition to high blood glucose. So collectively or combined, that becomes a cardiometabolic risk factor. Low strength is associated with increased risk for cardiometabolic disorders and conditions. And this is verified by the work of Yang and his colleagues in 2019, where they conducted a longitudinal, so over a 10-year period, they kept doing these follow-up assessments on a group of men aged 21 to 66 who happened to be firefighters. So they followed them for 10 years and they did an annual strength test through, simply put, it was a push-up test. And what they observed is the individuals in that group over the 10-year period who routinely could not do more than 10 push-ups were more likely to end up or possess cardiovascular disease. So there is a direct link between your heart health and strength, as well as a direct link between strength and your cardiometabolic, which can infer increased risk for diabetes as well. So it is really, really important from a public health perspective that people recognize that, yes, they have to be active and maintain a level of fitness. And as part of that level of fitness they maintain, strength is very quickly moving up the chart when it comes to important and modifiable risk factors for chronic disease. Chronic disease. Now, the good news is, as you can see in the slide, that these researchers noted that 40 push-ups was in the upper quartile. So the men who could do 40 push-ups had the lowest risk, and those who can do 10 or less had the highest risk. But it's not necessary to expect your client to get to 40 push-ups, because that's not an easy achievement. And there will be some individuals, because of their a potential non-responder phenomenon or a genetic phenotype, which will mean that they might not be able to get to 40, but it doesn't mean that they can't reduce their risk factors. And that's important to note. As long as they're improving their strength and moving up the category, so if they start with just 5 or 6 push-ups and you can get them to 16, and then maybe you can get them to 26, you're reducing their risk every time you improve the number of push-ups they can do. And that's an important take-home, because what you don't want to do is set people up for failure or have them lose confidence simply because 40 is just too far ahead of them and it might not be achievable. But it's really, really important. This is why do we need to promote muscular fitness? The why. And it's because of its increased status as a risk factor, and research that looks at grip strength as a predictor of all sorts of chronic conditions, mortality, disability, is equally as prevalent and as strong, probably more so. So collectively, the common denominator is strength. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yes, you do need to read between the lines a little bit here. And for those of you who are working with older adults, you're better off pursuing a grip strength test. Okay, because in this study, the age range was 21 years right up to 66. So there were some participants in this study who were in that age bracket of around the 66 years of age, as young as 21. So my advice to any of you working with deconditioned, disabled, elderly clients is work off a grip strength test rather than a push-up test. Because of course, that's not going to be very motivating for the client when the very first test, you know, they're told that they've got to get to 40 or they're in trouble. So remember, it's the improvement in strength that creates a positive risk factor, not a negative risk factor. That's what we should be pursuing. So that's why it is important. You will find, yeah, there is a bit of a gender bias in that slide. Plenty of research on grip strength and all-cause mortality, disability in female populations as well as male. And I'm happy to share them with you. If there's a specific request, I'm happy to send you some of those studies on grip strength. So that gives us a bit of the basis behind why we want to pursue a bodyweight exercise program that promotes strengthening. And that's the key thing, that our bodyweight training programs, the key outcome we're looking for, what we're trying to achieve from a goal and outcome perspective, is the improvement in muscular strength, because that's where the health benefits really going to come from. But to improve muscular strength, we have to dose our resistance training properly. And bodyweight training is a form of resistance training. Body acts as the resistance. So we need to understand these mechanical principles now, so we can go on and look at the bodyweight exercises that the client can do safely and make sure we're making the appropriate progression selections for the client. So to do that, some mechanical principles I want to remind you of for some of you, and for others I'm going to introduce you to, that you can use to help guide your bodyweight exercise selections. Moment arm manipulation, center of mass manipulation, and lever manipulation. So these are foundation biomechanical principles that guide exercise selection. So this first principle, moment arm, for some of you, this will be a new topic. And what's important is this is a simple overview of some of these principles are definitely more detailed than what I'm presenting tonight. And what I want to do to you is just bring to your attention how you only need a pretty simple understanding of these mechanical principles to have a good effect on being a safe exercise practitioner, because you'll be able to modify the exercise with a little bit of this knowledge. So moment arms essentially are a way at looking at an exercise and deciding whether or not the exercise that you're using is going to hit the target muscles that you're after. That's one way we can use this knowledge. The longer the moment arm, the greater the work of the muscle. So it helps us target specific muscles, and it helps us, an understanding of moment arms, helps us understand how to potentially make an exercise harder or easier. And the three considerations for a moment arm are: one, the point of force. So whereabouts are we creating the force? So where the muscle attaches is usually where the point of force is. The point of resistance. So where is the resistance? Now in our bodyweight exercises, of course, our arms and legs become levers, or our trunk, and we manipulate the position of our arm and leg. And then lastly, where is the fulcrum, or the axis of rotation? So here's an example that should help you understand why this information and knowledge is important. So a classic case of our lunges, and how do we manipulate a lunge to potentially target different muscle groups? So with our knowledge of our moment arms, we can see that the line of resistance will always be vertical because of gravity. We're working in an upright field. And that we will have two positions where there's going to be movement. That movement's going to come from our knee and from our hip. So if we look at the position of an inclined lunge, where the trunk is inclined forward, the first thing that should present itself to you is that the moment arm from the hips or the glutes is actually longer than the moment arm from the quadriceps. So what that suggests is if you're performing lunges with an inclined trunk position, that the work is going to be greater for the glutes. And this is backed up by some research and many others that have verified that the inclined trunk position targets the glutes to a greater extent than the quadriceps. Now, conversely, when we look at a vertical trunk position, the moment arm for the glutes or the hips becomes a lot shorter, and the moment arm for the thighs becomes a lot longer. Okay. So you can eyeball these things as a coach and trainer. You don't necessarily need to pull out sophisticated biomechanical software to measure these moment arms, but you can begin to eyeball movement and consider the effect of it on the moment arm. So if the moment arm is longer, as we can see in an upright position with the trunk, we're going to get more quadricep activity. And if we take a more inclined approach, we're going to see more glute activity. So this is one very simple example of a way we can use the knowledge of moment arms to decide, well, how am I going to target the glutes or emphasize the glutes in a lunge? What changes do I need to make? How can I cue this exercise to achieve a better outcome if that is the goal? We want to emphasize more glute activity. So this research has actually been paralleled in the squat, and we see very similar effects on the moment arm when we compare a back squat versus a front squat for the very same reasons, that when we perform a back squat, and this again can pertain to just a basic bodyweight squat, they're performing a bodyweight squat with the trunk angled forward, we engage more glutes. We get greater hip extension, we increase the moment arm at the hip. Then if we perform more of a front squat action, we're going to create a longer moment arm at the thigh. And the research supports that hypothesis that front squats typically emphasize more of the quadriceps. Now I say emphasize because we don't see a pure black and white scenario in these modifications of lunges and squats where we're purely working glutes and we're purely working quadriceps. So it's not that black and white. There's just a greater emphasis on one over the other. And of course, that's affected by your moment arms. Another example of how we can use moment arms, and this time the example is placed on a sit-up or a crunch. So in a sit-up, we can see how the position of the load is more important than the amount of load. So in other words, we can see that when we have our arms outstretched, we're performing a variation of a sit-up or a crunch, the arm extended, the moment arm becomes a lot longer than when we perform a crunch and our hands are by our side. So we're increasing the lever, we're increasing the torque on our abdominal muscles because the moment arm is greater, and that's that perpendicular distance between those two vertical lines. The moment arm always tends to be the perpendicular distance between the effort or the force and the resistance arm. In our next mechanical principle, we can also use manipulations of our center of gravity and our super incumbent body weight to manipulate the difficulty of an exercise. So a common example is looking at the progressions of a push-up. So for weak and deconditioned clients and individuals, they'll often start with a wall push-up. And then we might progress from a wall push-up to an incline push-up. From an incline push-up, you might progress to a full push-up or a knee push-up. There might be an intermediary step. And then if their strength continues to progress, we might then make the exercise more difficult by putting them in the incline position. So placing the body in these different positions alters or changes the position of the center of mass, your center mass. So as the angle gets steeper, more of your body weight is supported by the hands. So as we progress from being in a wall push-up to an incline, flat, and then a decline, you'll note that the angle of the arm becomes steeper and our center of mass keeps moving forward. What that means is we're progressively lifting more of our body weight. So anytime you change the angle of a particular movement or an exercise, in addition to affecting muscle activity, you're also changing the location of the center mass, meaning more weight is being distributed on the active muscle groups involved in the exercise. So this gives you some understanding why. You know instinctively that the hardest push-up to do is when you're inclined, with your feet inclined, I should say. And we naturally go towards or migrate towards a wall push-up. But why is that so? So the further the center of mass moves towards your axis of rotation, the more body weight is lifted in the lift. So you can start to think about particular body weight exercises you commonly do and how you actually manipulate them, and apply this knowledge to your progressions that help give you a better mechanical understanding of why these progressions are more difficult or potentially easier. And in our last mechanical principle, we look at levers in the body. And again, some of this might bring back memories from some of your studies where you're introduced to the 3 different types of levers in the body, one being a first class, with the example here with the fulcrum is placed between the resistance and the effort arm. First class levers are typically less common in the body. Second class lever, where we have a fulcrum and the resistance is placed between the effort and the fulcrum. And then the third class, which by and large, most of our bodily movements and joints occur as a third class lever. So the reason why understanding levers is important, because some body weight exercises are going to put you at a mechanical advantage and some aren't. Second class levers typically give us that mechanical advantage to lift more weight. So we think about examples of body weight exercises that use a second class lever arrangement. The common example is in a calf raise, and this explains why it's a lot easier to lift your body weight with a calf raise than it is, say, a chin-up. If you think about a chin-up versus a calf raise, you know very well that a lot of your clients don't have the strength to do a chin-up when they first come and see you in their early sessions, yet if you were to give them a calf raise just with their body weight, they could perform a calf raise, by and large, most of the time, a lot easier than they could perform a chin-up. So having a knowledge of levers is important so we can get a better understanding of which bodyweight exercises are going to help the client either progress into a program or even need to be regressed. So the example of a first class lever in the body is a tricep dip. So that's where we do see, again, like a second class, we tend to see more of an emphasis on mechanical advantage in a first class lever. Our second class lever, as I alluded to, is a calf raise. And then for our third class lever, which is a lot of the exercises we perform at resistance exercise, but in body weight training, the example of a third class lever is a supine knee curl on a Swiss ball. That's forming a leg curl, lying on your back, curling a fit ball in towards your thighs, bending your knees. So remember that, and that helps you understand why the basis of bodyweight exercise selection, particularly for those clients who are coming in with a low training background. So another important reason why levers give us the requisite knowledge to prescribe bodyweight exercise safely is it allows us also to determine how much load is going to be lifted. So this is a very, very important topic because there is a big assumption that a push-up is an easy exercise. And a very common occurrence for me as I review my students' exercise programs when they're writing programs is I'll see a push-up placed in an exercise program for a client who doesn't have the requisite strength to even do that push-up. And what I'm referring to, the requisite strength, is this research from Evan and Zarkareski, where they've looked at how much load is in a push-up. A lot of people are shocked to know that in a full push-up, the loads sit between 64 and up to 70% of your body mass. So let's use some easy numbers, and I'll come back to the example of why I routinely have to change a push-up exercise in a program or tell students not to use a push-up in a novice program. So if we assume the client that they're writing a program for is 100 kilos, then each repetition, they're potentially lifting as much as 64 kilos. Yet, if we were to assess their strength on an exercise that utilizes the same muscle groups, so let's say we assess their strength on a bench press or any chest pressing motion, we would find that they wouldn't be able to lift that much weight. So you can see that the percentage of body weight in our push-up progressions are affected by our levers and our moment arm. So we're shortening the moment arm, we're seeing less load. We lengthen the moment arm, we see more load. So in a inclined push-up with the feet elevated, we're getting up to 75% of your body weight. So the heavier the client is, the more load they're going to experience in a push-up. And that load often exceeds their strength base, particularly at a novice level or an entry level program. So what that suggests is that prescribing a push-up for a novice client may actually exceed their strength capacity. Yet it's the first exercise you'll see in a lot of bodyweight programs or even conventional resistance training programs. So we need to appreciate how much load is being lifted in a bodyweight exercise, quantify that load, so we're not at risk of overtraining our clients or even putting them at risk of an injury because they're trying to perform an exercise that they don't have the strength to do. So understanding how much of the body weight is being moved in any particular exercise helps you then ensure that the client isn't being asked to do an exercise that's too difficult for them. So we can see that through anthropometric charts, estimations of how much different segments of our body weighs. So another example is that a bodyweight squat typically means that they're lifting somewhere between 65 to 75% of their body weight just in one bodyweight squat. So again, clients who are coming in with very low fitness base, asking them to lift that much weight on a leg press or another compound movement that uses the same muscle groups, you would very quickly see that they might struggle to lift that percentage of their body weight in a conventional resistance training exercise, which then indicates that they're actually you're giving them a body weight exercise that exceeds their strength base, potentially. So always appreciate just how much weight is being moved in an exercise, and that weight I'm referring to is how much of the body segments are involved in a particular lift. So an easy one is, of course, a chin-up because you're lifting your whole body mass. So one chin-up is equivalent to their body weight. So you've just got to make sure that they have that strength in a lat pull down before prescribing a chin-up. Is there a percentage for hands elevated but on the knees instead of toes? Not that I'm aware of, Carol, but doesn't mean that data isn't there. Again, any of these questions I can't answer here, I'm happy to follow up for you. So I hope that's a very, very important take home, because you'd be surprised how many exercise programs that I come across have push-ups as a second or third exercise. Yet you look at what's prescribed for their pressing movement, and their pressing movement, they're using a lot less weight. So the assumption is that everyone can do push-ups, or push-ups are easy. That's a great question, Ingrid, about how does the emphasis of muscular contraction affect strength? And I'll address that in the next section. But what I will say is there is a trade-off between in manipulating an exercise to make it a little bit harder so you induce a strength response or an adaptation. But the trade-off is with how much of a pressure penalty that puts on a client, pressure penalty or a compression penalty. So as we make a push-up more difficult through some of the progressions you can see on this image and others, there is almost an exponential increase in the amount of pressure you're putting on their spine. And for some people with a lower back disorder, that could exceed their tissue tolerance and exacerbate an old injury. But before we get to compression and safety tolerances, I want to touch on muscle activity. That's the next frontier of understanding bodyweight exercise. So while some of you may and some of you may not be familiar with the research that gets conducted when we want to understand muscle activity, just how much muscle activity there are in particular exercises and variations, this type of knowledge comes from electromyographic research. And electromyographic, or EMG for short, measures the muscular response or electrical activity to a nerve stimulation or a movement. And it's typically done with surface electrodes are placed on a muscle. It's connected to a device that then measures the electrical activity of muscle. So all of that's necessary to help us understand just how much a muscle is activated in any given movement. What a lot of people don't appreciate is there's particular thresholds that we need to reach if we're going to achieve our goals. So as we discussed earlier in this presentation, a really important goal of your body weight training is to improve strength. So what that means is if you have a knowledge of the body weight exercises that produce a high enough contraction, then you can make the best selections for your clients in order for them to realize that change, to realize their strength goals. So that means you need to understand that we typically are required to elicit a contraction intensity that's 70% of a maximum effort. Just like if you are familiar with 1RM bench pressing and squat testing or 1RM testing in general, maximal strength testing, we do a 1RM strength test, and then we might prescribe a resistance training program that's based off percentages of that max lift. So this is a very similar concept. You understand that methodology for exercise, resistance exercise prescription. So typically a researcher will get a client person into a lab and they'll have them do a maximum effort of a particular exercise. So ask them to do that exercise at a maximal intensity. Usually it's usually isometric. So they'll be doing that as an isometric contraction of a particular movement or a particular position. They'll go, okay, we know what 100% is. And now what we'll do is we'll look at how much that muscle is active in different variations of exercise. So we need to get to at least 70% of that maximum number for an exercise to be helpful for improving strength. So if we look at a particular exercise and see research tells us that that muscle only activates at a contraction intensity of 45 to 70%, then we're looking at an exercise that's more beneficial for endurance, stabilization, or motor control. So in other words, the threshold appears to be 70%. There is some debate about that 70% threshold in the literature. So like most things, nothing is certain in science. So it's not necessarily black and white, but it's a general guideline for you to go, okay, well, I'm interested in writing my client a bodyweight training program. I want to make sure I select the best exercises for these particular muscle groups that I'm interested in targeting and strengthening. So I might go ahead and do some reading and find out which particular bodyweight exercises have been shown to have the highest level of EMG, and at least at that 70% level. So I can be confident that the client's going to achieve their strength goals. So I'm giving them the right exercises to do that, the right selections. And I'm just coming back to a quick question from Kylie. Thanks, Kylie. With push-ups, so there is absolutely an integrated effect in a push-up, which means we are using more muscles in a push-up, more hot core muscles than we are in a machine, and that would absolutely be a factor to why some people will find a push-up more difficult than, say, a chest press machine or even a bench press. So we also have a closed kinetic versus open kinetic difference. So in a closed kinetic chain exercise where our limbs are in contact with the ground or a stable surface, it tends to promote more stabilizing contractions, where movements that are done in an open kinetic fashion, tend to create more shear and less stability. And because we are wired, our nervous system is wired for safety. We are wired for safety first. So once the nervous system tells us we're safe, we can express force. But when the nervous system says, hold on a minute, we're very unstable, priority number one is keep you alive. So we're going to down-regulate force, the expression or the exertion level, so you stay safe. So whenever we're in a position where there's more stability required, we're likely to see a difference in strength. And this has been shown in research that's looked at the differences in strength on a Swiss ball when people do exercises on a Swiss ball versus on a stable surface or any unstable surface. In fact, the common finding in those researchers is that instability does limit the expression of strength. But there might be other benefits, but just purely from, is this exercise going to maximize strength? If we're doing it on or in an unstable environment, then we're less likely to see the expression of strength or force magnified. So 70% of yes, that's a great question. How do we sort of translate that into a typical conventional rep set time under tension scheme. Well, what we use this information for is just to make sure we start with the right exercise, then our progressions can help increase the effect of that exercise. So we don't typically, the maximum voluntary in isometric contraction is used for the development of strength, muscle endurance, and motor control and stability. It's not necessarily used for plyometric training. It doesn't necessarily apply to plyometric training. So let's provide you an example of a very, very common bodyweight exercise that for a lot of people might be the first exercise they use when they want to improve strength. So research suggests that in a supine glute bridge, the level of muscle, trunk, and hip activity, it isn't sufficient for improving strength. And that means it didn't reach the muscle activity. The muscle activity level didn't reach that 70% threshold. In fact, they're a lot lower. So somewhere down towards the 45% end of the spectrum, which means that a glute bridge is a great exercise when your client's first starting out and we're developing motor control and muscle endurance, which is usually what we do when we're introducing a novice or a beginner into an exercise program, or we're helping somebody come back after an injury. It's not advisable to prescribe them a bodyweight exercise that's going to maximize glute activity until they've got a bit of a base first. To build some muscle endurance, build some stability, then we look for another variation of a glute bridge that does have greater muscle activity in the glutes. So that's why an understanding of muscle activity is important. Further, if we look at our bodyweight squats, so again, just drawing on the research in this field of muscle activity, that our dynamic bodyweight squats seem to promote very good stability in the spine. The muscle activity in the trunk in a bodyweight squat is very high. So dynamic squat training at progressed speed, so if we're increasing cadence, so this comes to a bit of a time under tension principle, may be useful for strengthening for people with trunk and low extremity weakness. So the level of muscle activity in a bodyweight squat, again, if we're purely looking at particular muscles, for the trunk muscles, we're getting great activity in the trunk muscles in a bodyweight squat. So it's not just about the thighs and the glutes, it's also showing us and helping us understand the benefits of a bodyweight squat. And it might be useful for those with lower extremity muscle weakness. So it's a good starting point. That exercise is safe, but also it's going to help build some stability and strength, not just in the lower limbs, but also the trunk. Another very common bodyweight exercise is the plank. So again, just looking and drawing on this research on muscle activity, there's some important take-home messages on what you can do to produce a more effective plank for your clients even tomorrow, and that is to adjust the position of the pelvis. So in these images, what these researchers did is they looked at the muscle activity in the trunk with different pelvic positions. And they observed that the position of the scapula in the plank, as well as the position of the pelvis, really affects muscle activity in the trunk muscles, the core. So what this suggests is that manipulating the position of the scapula, making sure the scapula is fixed rather than just letting the scapula sit protracted, and adjusting the pelvic position can increase the muscle activity in your planks. And we can see that demonstrated here. So this bar graph shows us that the level of muscle activity in the rectus abdominis, aka the six-pack, was significantly higher when we manipulated the position of the pelvis and the scapula. So very few coaches do cue these positions. They cue the position of spinal alignment really well and make sure the client's in a good straight posture, but they don't realize that some simple manipulations to the scapular position and the pelvic position can influence trunk muscle activity. In other words, give you more bang for your buck for your planks. So next time you're doing a plank with your client, consider cueing them to change their pelvic position. So encourage more of a posterior pelvic tilt in their plank to increase muscle activity in the trunk. So a very simple cue, get them to tuck their butt under a little bit using the cues that you might be familiar with when it comes to pelvic positioning, can lead to increased activity in the trunk muscles and therefore help you get more out of your plank. And a very age-old debate was settled now 7 years ago by Catalog and his colleagues, where they looked at two parallel training programs. The two parallel training programs were a bench press program and a push-up program for 5 weeks. So there were two groups in this study, separated. Half the group went on to a push-up program, and the push-up program involved using resistance bands. So they're doing push-ups with resistance bands for 5 weeks. The other group did bench press training. They measured their strength at the start, at the end. They came back and found that there was very little, if not no difference in the strength gained between the two training groups. In other words, push-ups provided similar muscle activity and similar improvements in strength. So this was really one of my counseling methods for a lot of clients that my students were working with, who just were devastated they couldn't get to the gym during COVID, had the fear of God that they were going to lose their strength, lose muscle side, and were not convinced that body weight training could cut it without a weight. So it was this research that helped my students counsel some of these clients who we were seeing on telehealth, video conferencing or Zoom, to get the confidence that if they followed a resistance band aided push-up program, they could maintain the strength that they'd built up in the gym. And you can see very clear in these bar graphs that the muscle activity between grey is push-ups and green is bench, but very little difference in how much the pectoral muscles and the deltoids are getting activated in the two exercises. In fact, a little bit more deltoid in the push-up. And then we can see very, very similar pre to post strength gains in the two groups. Okay, so very similar. So it gives, hopefully it's this sort of information, this research, you can draw on to educate your clients if they're ever in a position where there is a limited access to a gym. But it also highlights the value of bodyweight training. And then lastly, just to show you some emerging technology. So don't forget that bodyweight training isn't necessarily always about the isotonic contractions, the eccentric, concentric contractions. Don't underestimate or underplay the value of isometric training. And I'll have more to say about that on another day about isometric training, because it's really trending, and the value of isometric training for a number of different health outcomes. And the one that's really interesting is how isometric training is now being used to treat blood pressure. That isometric training, body weight and isometric training go hand in hand. And it's another one of these great tools to know about how to dose isometric training, again, when there's limited access to equipment. And this technology that I'm showing on a slide, it's called Active 5, a little Bluetoothable, handheld, squashable little force gauge that you literally can put in all these different positions. And in this image, you can see somebody doing an isometric squat on it. And they've shown that the muscle activity with a bit of feedback, so they can actually see this on an app on their phone, they'll see that trace and they're encouraged to keep contracting their muscle, produces greater muscle intensity than an exercise where it's unaided or there's no visual feedback. So really showing you how the world of isometric training, in combination with emerging technologies like this Active 5 little force gauge, can really go a long way in helping you come up with alternative programs for your client, particularly if they're injured and they can't get to the gym or they're looking for something different. There's a whole host of these technologies out there that can help promote and support engagement in bodyweight training. So I urge you to consider that and look into these devices. So we're coming close to the end of the presentation now. So we're just going to cover our last topic, and that's injury prevention. So mechanical forces. So bodyweight exercise, like any exercise, will impose various different forces. And when it comes to safety, and I alluded to this at the start of the presentation, that not every exercise is safe for your client, even if it's a bodyweight exercise. And that's because different bodyweight exercises will affect joints in different ways. And it's typically the compression that is of greatest concern when it comes to spinal health and protecting people's back. Our shear forces is next in line. So some exercises impose more compression. Some exercises impose more shear. Sorry, just waiting. That was the one I was after. My apologies. And some give us more tensile forces. But from an injury prevention standpoint, the two forces we've got to be super careful about are compression and shear. And tonight we'll just focus on compression. So knowing what the compression limits are can help make sure you do not select an exercise for your client that might end up damaging their spine. So to start this particular section, it's really important you understand what that limit is. And for most healthy spines, the limit of compression approaches 3,300 newtons. And that's something we can't sort of measure in the gym, and we need specific and complex and sophisticated devices and machinery to measure these compression penalties. But other people have done the work for us, so we can follow in the footsteps of great researchers like Stuart McGill, Professor McGill, author of the book Lower Back Disorders, and some of his other research, where he's listed a whole bunch of different exercises and can tell you what the compression penalty is so you can make an informed choice. So we need to make sure that the exercises we select for our clients do not exceed these limits. This limit is the limit set by safety organisations like NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety, and they go around saying, well, if you're in the workplace, make sure your workers aren't lifting more than 25 kilos on their own. They put that limit in workplaces because lifting a 25 kilo box will impose this level of compression. That's the limit. It approaches 3,300 newtons. Anything above that starts to damage spines, particularly spines that are vulnerable. So any sort of repetitive loading above this level is linked to higher injury rates. So in other words, you do not want to be prescribing your clients bodyweight exercise or an exercise that's exceeding this compression penalty, because if you do, that client won't necessarily experience an injury there and then, but over time it'll wear their spine down. And as Professor McGill states, and he's highly quoted with this, that every spine has so many bouts of flexion before it will be damaged. So in other words, there's only so many times you can flex your spine to end range flexion, before that spine starts to experience damage. Now, this is beyond the scope of practice for many of the listeners here today, but just to let you know that there is orthopedic tests that can help a health practitioner identify whether a client has a compression intolerance. In other words, that any exercise that has a reasonably high level of compression is going to make their pain worse. And you can see here, this is an image of a compression tolerance test. It's usually done by physiotherapists and other allied health professionals. And the client then will sit on a chair or a stool and bear weight on the stool whilst they pull up. So they deliberately compress their spine with their head bent, or the neck flexed and trunk flexed. So it's a deliberate attempt to provoke pain. And if a person experiences pain in this posture, it tends to suggest that their back is vulnerable to compression, and exercises with high compression loads should be avoided. So with that background understanding, what continues to amaze me is how many individuals I see in health clubs still doing sit-ups. So a sit-up, and I've got an orange line here to make it very clear, if you recall, the compression limit was 3,300 newtons. So in every repetition of a sit-up, you're imposing 3,350 newtons of compression to somebody's spine. So every sit-up is exceeding this threshold that is set for workplaces on how much weight an individual can lift on their own. And that number goes up for variations of sit-ups, like a straight leg sit-up. Then if we go all the way to the bottom of this list, and what I want you to really understand is our exercises that have the lowest compression tend to be the isometric side bridges. So if you're looking for a safe exercise for your client's core muscles, for a client who's had a history of back problems, do not prescribe sit-ups. Give them an isometric side bridge instead, and then build them up these lists. start them at the core exercises and have the lowest level of compression, and then work with them progressively to challenge their core stability. There will be some individuals who will always need to stay at the lower end of these compression ranges, different vulnerabilities, different adaptation rates. But nevertheless, as a really important take home, please be very careful with sit-ups, using sit-ups as a core strengthening exercise because of this compression penalty. So this is McGill's data. This is now looking at push-ups. So it's not just common core exercises like sit-ups and planks. It's also exercises like push-ups that we talked about. And you can see here the blue dotted line denotes where the compression penalty starts to get exceeded, that safety limit. So though I've seen a few comments about cadence and eccentric, concentric manipulation, speed and momentum. I can see some comments. You'll see here that the more ballistic the push-up progression, the more compression it puts on somebody's spine. So we start to go to fast concentric push-ups. So let's say you've got your client doing a nice slow eccentric cadence, slow down and then explode up. So they do the push-up or the concentric phase really fast and vigorously. Well, that's going to exceed the safety limit compression. So in other words, that individual has to be very healthy, very fit, have a very robust and strong spine to be able to do those exercises on a regular basis and not potentially experience damage. And that goes up, and we look at some plyometric push-ups. So we've got a clapping push-up, and we get almost to double the spinal compression limit in an alternating plyometric push-up. So that's an exercise where the hands are alternated in an explosive manner. So they're pushing down and swapping hand positions at forward-back position. So please be aware of these limits, particularly if you're working with clients with a history of back pain. And our last example is on bodyweight pulls, so our pull variations, because we know with bodyweight training how popular our pull-ups and chin-up variations are. For the most part, these are very safe for the spine, so that's the good news. You won't see any variations of these pull-ups exceeding the 3,300 Newton penalty limit, which is great news. So from that perspective, sorry, just gone a slide too far, that your pull-up variations, particularly those on suspension cables or 3X cables, are generally pretty safe for most clients, and you're not going to approach those limits. It gets a little bit higher if you go to pull-ups and chin-ups, but for the most part, the inclined or angled rows that our clients are doing with suspension cables are pretty safe for their spine. Okay, so we're right on time. We've come to the end of this presentation. Hopefully now we've helped you recognise the scientific basis of bodyweight training, that you can now list 3 different mechanical principles that guide bodyweight exercise progressions. You can identify the muscle activity profiles of some bodyweight exercises, and you can select or at least understand which range of bodyweight exercises may or may not exceed the safety limits for spinal compression. So with that, I'm going to try and get through some questions. So I'm happy to stay back a little bit longer and get through as many questions as I can, depending on our host. Luke, are you there? Luke Morris.
Sorry, yeah, camera's just coming back on. Thanks for that, Luke. That was fantastic. And good to see Hayes has just popped up as well. Hello, Hayes.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome along. And yes, thank you, everyone, for popping those questions in. I could see a lot of you popping them in throughout, which is fantastic to see. And thank you so much, Dr. Luke, for getting to them all as well.
And it's very important we note here, Luke, that we've got the following. We've got a very special offer, and Hayes might want to talk about our special offer on our online courses. Hayes, did you want to mention something about this very exciting and special offer?
Yes.
Today?
Greetings, everyone. Nice to see you all, but I can't see anyone, but there's a few people online. If you can change the slide, Luke. For our online courses, our 2 big bestsellers, the science and application of bodyweight training, push-ups and planks, 10 CECs, and technical lifting online, half price offer ends end of the month. So you'll only pay $150 for each of those courses and earn 10 CECs. And if you change the slide again, please, one of the Lukes, you'll see the QR code or the coupon code. Most importantly, the coupon code to give you that discount. And it's also our URL. So if you want to take and save big money, but most importantly, quality content, the push-up and plank course is obviously an extension of some of the stuff you covered today, Dr. Luke. More focused on upper trunk endurance training and push-ups. I couldn't believe how many progressions and regressions you developed, up to 60, all in video format. And we've got an online course manual you can download. And for those that are into their strength training, technical lifting online, a very credentialed course, which has been run across the country, our bestseller. So half price for 2 weeks. We've got a bunch of other courses on our website, but we'd love to see you at some of our face-to-face ones as well. So anyway, that's the offer. There's the screen. Over to you, Luke, or any questions from the participants today, please go ahead.
Luke, Morris, are we on a time limit here? There's probably 4 questions I can see specifically.
Yeah, no strict time limit. We can sort of run through them. No problem. And yeah, guys, if jump on those courses. I know it's a fantastic offer, 50% off. So if you don't get the chance to scan the QR code, please email us at AusActive, or you can jump on our website and find a way to contact us as well. So if you don't get the chance, please reach out. We'll run through a few of these questions. So a little bit of a comment here from Lee. Deep squats can compromise a weakened pelvic floor. Yeah.
Look, I'm sure that's probably right. The focus of our presentation and on bodyweight exercises was, and that particular variation of bodyweight exercise is definitely muscle activity, but it's not to say there wouldn't be an interaction with pelvic floor. So I'm sure that there is definitely a consideration for the range of motion that you're going to get used in a squat, particularly if someone does have weakness in the pelvic floor. And that's probably further supported by the EMG or the muscle activity slide I showed, where the trunk muscles really do get used significantly in a squat.
For sure. So from Elisa, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. What about hand position on elbows or straight arm? What is more effective? I believe that was during the push-ups.
Yeah, right. So hand position, there is a lot of controversy about whether I go, does a narrow hand position influence the chest muscle activity and promote more tricep? And if I go wide, do I get less tricep and more pec? So that's a great question. And typically it's counterintuitive that the hand position, particularly a closer grip, isn't necessarily going to emphasize the triceps like most people think. And a wider position isn't necessarily going to emphasize the pecs. So hand position should generally be used as shoulder width as a starting point.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. From Henry, what about speed momentum in activity, slower movements over time? They accentuate resistance.
So faster movements put more pressure on the spine. So from a safety perspective, slower, more controlled bodyweight exercises are always going to be safer because you're going to lower the compression penalty. As you saw in that list of push-up progressions, the more ballistic and the faster we move, the more pressure we put on the spine.
Sure. From Roger, I need to adjust or test for osteoporosis.
Always, Roger, without a doubt. If you're working with a group of people who are at that age range and risk, bodyweight exercise, like any exercise, would be the straw that breaks the camel's back in an osteoporotic individual's hip or wrist. So always get a definitive medical opinion on the safety of that individual for all resistance training exercises.
From Stuart, do the high impact variations of push-ups cause shear as well as compression?
We tend to see more shear in the spine with movements like rowing. So the short answer is no, it's more compression. Shear tends to be exaggerated by movement, forwards and backwards movements. So rowing is a classic example where we see a lot more shear. Doesn't mean there's not shear at all, but typically high impact variations of push-ups tend to promote compression as being the first concern.
From Susanna, if we don't prescribe push-ups, what's best instead?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking for a bodyweight exercise for the same muscle groups, I would actually encourage you to look into the isometric training research and consider isometric exercises for those muscle groups. So if for whatever reason they can't do any variations of push-up, even a wall push-up, you can start with some isometric exercises.
From Theo, what are your thoughts on dips for your pecs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Theo. Dips really is a Pandora's box. We're actually conducting research here at SCU on dips and looking at some of the muscle activity and other profiles of dips. Look, they will challenge the shoulders, Theo. Just understand that that position puts them in a position where the shoulder is extended and sometimes extremely rotated. So it can aggravate unstable shoulders. Someone with a history of shoulder instability will find dips hard. And if you go for a really wide dip, you challenge the shoulder integrity and risk of pec tear, as well as shoulder impingement. So dips just need to be carefully dosed and be mindful not to work at extreme ranges of motion.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Theo. So I believe that is all of them that have popped in for now. So thank you everyone for being so interactive tonight as well, throwing so many questions in. Thank you, Dr. Luke, for coming along, and thank you, Hayes, as well, for throwing up that fantastic offer. So make sure you guys all jump on that, and yeah, again, just reach out if you didn't have the chance to scan that. Any closing words at all, Dr. Luke?
No closing words. No, I think we've covered it pretty comprehensively. But I'm happy to take any further questions. You can forward them on to me if someone didn't get their question answered. I'm happy to respond to that. You can just contact me with the deeper questions, Luke, and I'm happy to address them.
Yep. Yeah, of course, no worries. And if anyone does want to reach out, their website is there to reach out to Australian Combat and Exercise. And of course, if you want to speak to Hayes or Dr. Luke as well, feel free to reach out to myself and we can pass on their details. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming along. There'll be a short feedback survey which will pop up just once we finish tonight. So please throw your thoughts on the session, and everyone will be getting 1 CC tomorrow, which would be fantastic. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Luke.